items. The numbers you have on the screen, you can either call in. It's 866-299-3188, and the passcode is 919-541-5265. You can listen through your computer. We will be recording the call today, and we will be posting this on our Wellabook webpage. If you are following the webinar, you can make the screen a full screen by hovering over the icon on the right-hand side of your screen that has the 4 arrows pointing out, and click on that, and it'll make it full screen. That will make your Q&A box disappear, so if you want to type in a question, then hover back over the same part of your screen, hit the icon, and it will reduce down so your question box will open back up. If you are using the phone line, please hit the mute on your computer so we don't get any feedback. And if you have trouble with the audio, you can go to this meeting box and verify that your speakers are working. And if you lose audio again, go ahead and log out and log back in, and that should solve the problem. Or you can text us, and we can do some troubleshooting for you through the Q&A box. So the Q&A box, again, I think we've already talked about this. You can type in questions along the way. We will answer questions towards the end. For the smoothest operations, it's always best to close other applications so that you don't flip back and forth and slow down your computers. And there's the link to where the presentation will be available. Today's presenter is going to be Holly Wilson. And Holly, I'm pulling up the screen now, and why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and take over.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. My name is Holly Wilson. I'm with the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. And thank you again for taking time to join us on this webinar entitled Techniques and Skills for Providing Effective Input in the EPA Rulemaking Process. The purpose of today's webinar is to prepare you to be more effective in contributing to the development of a rule and to help you become more competent in your ability to do so. So next slide. So let's just start with the basics, the regulatory basics. Congress passes laws that govern the United States, and then Congress grants EPA and other federal agencies the authority to put those laws into effect by creating and enforcing regulations. Then those regulations become mandatory requirements that can apply to individuals, businesses, states, or local governments, nonprofit institutions, or others. Next slide. EPA regulations, the process. For developing most regulations, EPA follows the same general process. Step 1, EPA proposes a regulation, including specific periods for public input through both written comments and public hearings. Proposed regulations are published in the Federal Register, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Federal Register a little bit later. Step 2, EPA collects and considers comments from the public and issues a final rule. And step 3, the final regulation is published in the Federal Register, then is codified and added to the Code of Federal Regulations. For today's webinar, we'll be focusing on step 2, the regulatory process, and how you can comment on proposed regulations issued by EPA. So, where do we find information about regulations? Well, you can find out information about regulations that are in the works and when to provide comments. These three main websites will answer typically the 3 main questions that folks have when going through this process. So the first question usually is, what are the regulations? What regulations are expected to come out over the next year? Reginfo.gov, the Unified Agenda and Regulatory Plan, EPA contributes to the U.S. government's unified agenda, which is released twice a year, spring and fall. Our regulatory plans and agendas broadly describe the regulatory activities that EPA will be undertaking over the next year and EPA's core priorities over the next fiscal year. You can find the unified agenda at reginfo.gov. The next key question is, what is EPA doing right now, and how do I comment? Proposed rules are published in the Federal and on the Federal Register website along with the deadline to comment. Regulations.gov is very popular. Each year, EPA receives millions of comments on proposed rules, notices, and other actions. Through regulations.gov, you can see what other people are submitting about an EPA rule. This website collects and publicizes information related to EPA regulations such as public comment and background documentation. It's also EPA's official online comment system that serves as a clearinghouse for materials related to EPA rulemakings. Other federal agencies also use this comment system. You may submit comments on proposed regulations via this website by email, snail mail, aka U.S. Postal Service, or even fax. Third question, how do I know what the current regulations say? govinfo.gov is a website that provides free access to official publications from all three branches of the federal government. It is a great source of all kinds of information, including the Federal Register, which we mentioned earlier. And just FYI, the Federal Register is an official daily publication for rules, proposed rules, and notices of federal agencies. The website is maintained by the Government Printing Office and provides access to every regulation published in the Federal Register since 1936. It is a good site for searching a variety of electronic resources. And the Federal Register is published daily except for federal holidays. The EPA docket. The EPA docket contains EPA docket contains it contains information that EPA uses in the rulemaking and other agency actions that explain or support its decisions. It contains public input provided through the formal comment process and public hearings. The dockets are available for public review. So things that you might find in this document that can be quite large after the rulemaking process is over with might include data information, reports of all kinds, modeling results, legal and policy memos, public comments, transcripts of public hearings, etc. All comments submitted are put into this official docket for the rule. So, how can your participation in the EPA rulemaking process make a difference? Well, to start, become familiar with the rulemaking process. You are most likely to make a difference if you get involved early and stay engaged with the process throughout. By learning the issues and developing relationships with officials and other stakeholders, you increase your ability to engage effectively. Always come prepared to provide ideas, examples, and evidence. People who just complain or harp on the issues can be perceived as not really knowing what they're talking about, and detailed regulatory requirements are further along in the proposal. You may find that text can be dense and very technical, but it's worth your time to go through it. You can find important nuggets in that part of the text regarding the rule. So beginning your assessment, do you agree with the underlying assumptions? Is important information missing? Do you agree with the methodologies used in the assessment, such as monitoring or risk assessments? Do conclusions and recommendations appear to be logical and supported? Be sure you document the reasons for your comments. So a good place to start is by looking to see if the document is logical and if it's complete. Look for omissions and errors and things that are not clear or well-grounded or just don't seem to be justified by the analysis. Continuing your assessment, next slide. Check for consistency with other information. Determine if the proposal is internally consistent and makes sense overall. Are the findings in agreement with your understanding of the situation? Do the tables and the text match? Is the math correct? Then look to see if the information is reliable. Check the facts with other sources. Check cited references. Confirm your understanding with allies and other experts. Next slide. So here are a few tips. Make your comments easy to follow. Be organized, clear, concise, convincing. Support your key comments with evidence. Provide solutions. Follow instructions carefully and submit your comments by the deadline. It's very important. Comments submitted late will not be reviewed or considered. Next slide. Organization and format. You want to make your comments look professional. You want them to be easy to read, easy to follow. So put yourself in the shoes of the people that are reading through perhaps thousands of comments. Make their job as easy as possible by having your comments well organized and formatted. Your comments should be professional looking and the text should not be hard to read. Make your key points stand out by using headings, indentions, bolding, and bullets. Long paragraphs and lots of detail are much harder to assimilate. So you may want to use an outline type of format. You still need to provide a full explanation, but be thoughtful in your use of text. Even if you're submitting only a few pages, it's usually helpful to provide a table of contents, especially for documents that are longer. That's essential. Next slide. Style. Use topic sentences, short sentences, 50 words or less. Avoid passive voice, write in first person, and communicate honestly and with respect. Next slide. Content. Start by identifying legal shortcomings. We've kind of mentioned some of these before already. Pinpoint factual mistakes. Suggest specific language. Highlight items that you support or don't support and provide examples and offer alternative solutions. Use notes that you've made during your assessment of the document to develop the content for your comments. Identify factual mistakes. Is the information wrong or misleading? Is the information outdated or incomplete? If relevant information is missing, you provide it. If the language in the document is not clear or you have a different idea, provide specific alternative text. This really helps the reader understand what you're trying to convey. You should try to avoid being entirely negative. Point out things that you agree with or that you can even support. Help the reader gain an understanding by drawing on specific relevant experiences to illustrate possibilities and opportunities. If the document does not adequately deal with the problem, be specific about the solution and what should be considered instead. Next slide. Before submitting your comment, again, something really important. Check for accuracy and clarity in your comments. Proofread closely. Make sure that what you're submitting makes sense by having someone else read through your comments for accuracy and clarity. Next slide. So on to public hearings. For many proposed EPA actions, there's an opportunity to request a hearing, and there's a process for this. Usually, a panel of 2 or 4 EPA managers and staff attend to listen to the public share their comments. This is the agency's opportunity to listen and ask clarifying questions. It's not a dialogue. Speakers usually sign up in advance and are given a time slot to speak for 3 to 5 minutes. A court reporter produces a transcript that is entered into the docket for the rulemaking. Written comments can also be turned in at a public hearing. And it's important to note here, if speaking at a public hearing is just too nerve-wracking, you can submit your comments in writing, and your oral comments or written comments have the same weight. There's no advantage or disadvantage to speaking or not speaking and submitting your comments in writing. Next slide. So preparing to speak at a public hearing. Again, you want to make sure that you've read the preamble and the proposed rule and you've reviewed all the relevant documents. EPA proposed rules are accompanied by fact sheets that summarizes key aspects of the proposal and may help answer some of the questions that you may have. Public hearings for proposed rules is an opportunity for you to offer comments in a face-to-face setting. Note, not all proposed regulations offer public hearings. Again, there's a process to request this. If you've never spoken at a public hearing, or for that matter, even a public meeting, it's natural that you may feel some anxiety or unsure of yourself. By putting some effort into preparation and practicing ahead of time, you can become more confident and ready to step up to that microphone. Be prepared. Reread the rule and other key documents. Contact your EPA regional office to get more information about the substance or process of the hearing. EPA has 10 regional offices around the country, and you can find out more about these regional offices by visiting their websites. Next slide. Okay. Developing your oral comments. Make sure your comments are 3 to 5 minutes. Focus on the questions that EPA is outlining in the preamble. We've said that before. But here are some guidelines for those making effective oral comments. Focus on the subject of the hearing. Other things may be important to you, but if the hearing is strict, other things may be important to you, but the hearing is strictly to get feedback on the identified issues. Again, you can find out by contacting, your regional office or looking more at the public hearing notice. You will be given a time limit to speak, usually between 3 and 5 minutes. So plan out what you're going to say, and if you start to move over that time, there will be someone to remind you of your time limit. So a trick for getting your key points across and staying on time. Make sure that it's one key message per minute. That's kind of the rule of thumb. State your view and provide a little bit of rationale for it. Use data where you can support your presentation. Offer concrete solutions whenever possible. Make it easy for the audience to understand what you're saying by using appropriate terms. Practice makes perfect. And you may want to just practice what you're going to say and just use a timer on your phone or have someone else time you so that you can get in what you want to say in that 3 to 5 minutes. Be sure that you're commenting on the action that is the subject of the hearing or meeting. If the hearing is about a proposed rule, make sure that you're commenting on the proposed rule instead of a permit, for example. That happens and it's easily to get mixed up. Lastly, actually speaking at a public hearing or meeting. Respect the time limits. Again, there'll be someone to help you stay in that time frame. Speak clearly and confidently, and it doesn't hurt to follow up your written comments, your oral comments in writing. When you step up to that microphone, stay on message and stay within the time allotted. Speak with conviction and with confidence. Again, like I said, you can reinforce your comments in writing where you can be more explicit, you can provide more evidence for your views, etc. Sometimes it's helpful to travel in a group to a public hearing, and other folks can offer up their perspective or may want to speak. Sometimes it's just nice to have someone come along for moral support. Again, Feel free to submit your comments in writing if talking in front of a group of folks is just too overwhelming. Again, they'll be taken and considered with the same weight. This concludes our webinar, and I'll turn it back over to Laura for Q&A.
Okay, so give us just a second, and we're going to walk through some of the questions, and we'll start reading them. Hold on. Okay, so the first question we have, do the comments from scientists and lobbyists carry the same weight, and do public comments carry the same weight as industry comments, and how is that determined? That's a really good question, and they all carry the same weight. No one's comments are more valued than the others, but as Holly mentioned, sometimes if we understand the comment better, it's easier for us to respond to them. And so what we do when we get comments, we read all of them, and as part of the final rule, there is a section of the final rulemaking that is a response to comment document where we respond to those comments. Okay, the next question is, there was a length of time. Are the lengths of the comment periods codified by law, or is the time period discretionary by EPA?
Hi, this is Mike Herber. I'm the Deputy Director at QPS. So the public comment period is typically on the order of 30 to 60 days. There's also an opportunity, as was noted, for people to request a public hearing. We generally need to provide 15 days notice for a public hearing, and then we need to keep the record open 30 days after the public hearing. So a typical comment period length would be 45 days, but in some instances we'll extend that to 60 days.
So why do comments really matter and data should be driving the rules? Please explain. I think that it's, and I'll answer this and Mike and others can join in, but the science is an important part of the rulemaking process, but public comment is also a very important part. There are other aspects to the rulemaking, technology, weighing in on policy decisions, and so we definitely rely on the science and the information that the Clean Air Act requires that we look at when we're doing our rule writing. But the public comment process is an important part of the process, and it's and we weigh the sentiments of the public in general across the board. So the other aspect of that is that we evaluate all the comments that we have, and then we compile that and we make final decisions based on the authorities that the Clean Air Act gives us. We got another question about, do the number of comments make a difference? No, yes and no. If we have 30 comments from industry and one comment from somebody else, we still weigh the input equally. It's the value of the comment that's more important. But it does make a difference to us if we know that there's a lot of community comments and a lot of community interest out there. It means that people are very concerned about the issue that's at hand. So there's not a cutoff number that means that we're not going to evaluate one or the other, one side versus the other. But it does signal to us the interest in the rulemaking when we have a lot of comments. Okay, so the next question. Yeah, how do the Federal Register.gov and accessing the Federal Register from govinfo.com differ?
Hi, everybody. It's Allison Davis. So govinfo.gov has other links on it as well, but it also includes a link to the Federal Register. So it should take you to the same place. If you're looking for a Federal Register notice, you can use either one of those tools.
I think the govinfo.com is like, it's designed to be like a one-stop shop that gets you to a lot of different resources.
That's right. It has links to laws. It has links to congressional bills. It's a bigger basket, if you will.
So again, the next question is, why would a scientist or someone who is an expert not have greater impact? Please explain how this makes sense.
So our process when we do a rulemaking is very much data-driven. So opinions are important, but data carry a lot of weight. So to the extent that somebody can provide data, whether it's a scientist or somebody who's an expert or even somebody in the community who has information and data that's relevant to a rulemaking, that's very important to us. So again, a data-driven process, the better supported your comments are by actual data, the more weight they may carry.
And I do not see any additional comment or questions. We'll take a few minutes to remind people that we are having a data posting webinar on Friday, the same time, so 4 o'clock Central Time. And if you have other questions that come to mind, please contact Holly or myself, Laura McKelvey, and we will see if we can't get your questions answered.
Hey, Laura, I wanted to do a plug for our Clean Air Act. So I had mentioned earlier to make sure when you're providing comments that if it's about a proposal, you want to make sure that you're commenting on that proposal versus like a permit. And people have made that mistake before. But the other thing that you want to make sure is you want to make sure that the comments that you're giving EPA or any agency for that matter is within the scope of their authority. And that can be frustrating and confusing sometimes when folks mix up the authority between a state or a local or a federal entity. So you want to make sure that you do your homework when you're drafting comments to make sure the alternatives that you're offering up is within the scope of that particular agency's authority.
All right, thanks, Holly. And we did have another question come in. How does EPA decide where the hearings will be held?
So when we get requests for public hearing, we also typically get requests for a location for that public hearing, and we will take that into consideration. It really depends on the nature of the rulemaking. If it's a rule that's national in scope, we typically do those in Washington, where our headquarters are, or here in Research Triangle Park, where our air office that does stationary source rules is located. If it's a rule that has very limited applicability from a geographic standpoint, that will also be a consideration in where we might want to hold the rulemaking. But it really depends on the scope, the geographic scope of the particular rule as far as where we have the public hearing.
All right, again, since we don't have any more questions, we are going to give you a half hour back in your day, and we will talk to you on Friday when we have the data posting webinar. Thank you for calling in.
Thanks. Bye.